And welcome back. History often finds itself captured through the lens of those brave enough to document it. El Salvador, I should say, legacy of violence, pairs two monumental photographic projects, completed 3 decades apart, mirroring and informing one another. These images expose the turmoil and survival of El Salvador's people that are past and present and raise critical questions about the country's path forward. Joining me now is the photojournalist Robert Nickelsberg and Salvadoran documentary photographer Fred Ramos. And we thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for taking the time to really bringing this to light. For somebody who's looking and just says, listen, let's have this coffee table talk. What's this all about? What would you tell them?
Well, in the beginning, the migration traffic really is what kicks this off. And the images that I related in the exhibition were sitting in a box for almost 30 years. And once they were out and edited, it struck a chord how the images from back in the early 1980s resonate to today, to the migration issues along the border and the political ramifications of something that happened 40 years ago.
And when we talk about El Salvador, obviously a country that has had great prominence, but at the same time has also seen great challenges. From your work, obviously, Fred comes into the picture. Talk to me a little bit, Fred, about your perspective.
Hi. Yeah. Well, Salvador is a very important moment right now because despite all the information that you know about the arrest of cast members, Salvador is again in a dictatorship. So I think this is a very important thing for the exhibit because the dictatorship was the beginning of the civil war. Then the gangs took over the country very quickly after the civil war, and now we are another in a dictatorship. So I think it's very alarmed.
Yeah, Robert, you will be having a photo exhibit for the public to actually take a look. And when they look at your photos and they take a look and see Fred's photos as well, uh, I guess some things that are going to come to mind are questions about foreign policy. What do the United States foreign policy, for to be exact? What are you hoping that people actually are able to see slash take away as they look at these photos?
Well, in the context of the early 1980s, we had the Cold War, we had post-Vietnam War period. We also had a great amount of domestic turmoil with the civil rights movement. So given those elements, what we see today with the Middle East issues and the ramifications of U.S. foreign policy on how it affected migration along the Mexican-U.S. border, it's still relevant to today what happened 40 years ago. And I saw this again in 2021 with the collapse of the Afghan regime and the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan. A lot of these things recur. And the way this exhibition is curated with Fred's contemporary work and my archival work, I think the public can get a good idea that a lot of things hold together even though there's 40 years apart.
Yeah. Fred, talk to me a little bit about El Salvador. Obviously, a rise in gangs, quality of life dramatically changing, and you document it.
Yeah, I mean, well, the exhibition shows the long legacy of violence, but I think that when we talk about violence in El Salvador, we also talk about justice. And in the exhibit, so you can basically understand the consequence of the absence of justice. Many of the victims that are in the exhibit that Bob and me will photograph, they are still waiting for justice. I think this is very important thing of the country of the exhibit too.
Yeah. Robert, let me go back to you for a second because you've worked for Time Magazine as a photographer for more than 30 years. You've seen it all, but when it comes to El Salvador, put it in perspective for us for how this compares to the work that you've seen thus far.
Well, this period, at least for my work, is the foundation period for me in understanding the narrative of foreign policy, domestic policy, and how a country can be influenced by US foreign policy. there are certain responsibilities that I feel go with that narrative, and a lot of them weren't met. A lot of the military aid that went into El Salvador in this 12-year civil war, then all of a sudden was turned off. And reconstruction really never happened. There was no closure. The people in El Salvador still suffer the consequences of that civil war. And now they're facing asylum issues when they come across the border. So this legacy, and the exhibition is called Legacy of Violence, continues to this day. There might be a bit of a respite in El Salvador right now, but that is temporary, in my opinion. I think Fred also sees that very clearly.
Yeah. Fred, I'll ask you the question. You know, Robert talks about the archival side, knowing the fact that he's been, in it for a few more years. You come from a more contemporary perspective, but yet and still, when you bring the archival and then you bring the contemporary perspective, there is a meeting in the middle, because you can still say today, a lot of the things that exist today with regards to El Salvador are some of the facts and photos that were uncovered when Robert was first taking them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like the combination of both works are really interesting because you can see like the circle of the violence in El Salvador, and I think this is very important because you can understand how the violence just transform when there are no justice.
When people walk away from this exhibition, and we want to say that it's going on until October the 27th, when people walk away from the exhibition, I'll start with you. Tell me first, Fred, what do you want people to take away from it?
Sorry, say it again. Sorry.
When people walk away from the exhibition, what do you want people to take away from looking at these photos?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because at the end, El Salvador is not an important country in the geopolitics, but I think that the consequence of the violence are very obvious in the United States through the migration. But also, I think that the other thing that is important is at the end that El Salvador is like for me, it's like a laboratory of the violence. So, well, a lot of politicians experiment with politics, with policies to control the violence, but at the end, I think that didn't work. So I think that this is, for me, it's a very important thing.
Yeah. Robert, you get the last word. Tell me your perspective on what you want people to take away.
I think with the exhibition, this is a very democratic way, an open public way for people to see the project that we put together. You don't have to buy the book; you can see it on the walls, and that exposes it to what we're still facing today. And it's important to know about the past in order to predict the future.
Well, we got to leave it there. Robert Nickelsberg and Fred Ramos, thank you so much. They're at the Bronx Documentary Series. And then if you want to find out more information, visit the website at bronxdoc.org. As again, the show goes on all the way till October the 27th. Encouraging you, don't go anywhere. We got more open coming up right after this.